Hey guys, welcome back. So now we are going back and we are covering Kieran Gillen's Immortal X-Men because it has been long enough and I want to cover this before we dive into Sins of Sinister, which kicked off on January 25th, but with that being a monthly series, it gives us time to get caught up with the 10 issues of Immortal X-Men. So as soon as we're done with these, we can just dive into Sins of Sinister and hit the ground rolling. But with that said, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so with how this begins, we start off with Mr. Sinister in Paris, France, in the year 1919, and we're shown at this time Destiny had joined him to give him a message. And just to be clear, this is Irene Adler, the wife of Mystique, who we had talked about recently during Judgment Day. But it's here where she comes to speak to Sinister, where she tells him that war is coming, and initially he thinks that she's talking about France going back to war. And I mean, at this point they just came out of one, and I want to say they're going to be back at war in less than a year or so. So it makes sense that Sinister would respond this way. But quickly Destiny lets him know that it's much bigger than what he realizes, and it's likely that the two of their fates are joined together. And regardless of whether they end up winning or not, she tells him that they need to be on the same side. And it's here where Destiny tells Essex to listen, as she whispers something in his ear, and immediately to Destiny's surprise, Sinister just collapses on the ground. And just after this, we see Mystique make her way there, asking Destiny what did she tell him. But in response, Destiny asks Mystique if she trusts her. But with how this conversation plays out, it's like a bit of cryptic foreshadowing, because Mystique responds to Destiny, telling her that if the whole world were to succumb to dust, then her trust for Irene would be the last thing that would survive, like right next to cockroaches. But with Mystique saying this, she lets Destiny know that what they have is immortal, to where then Destiny's then like, well, let's hope that it doesn't come to that, to be the way that she has to find out. But now after this, we then head over to the present day, where we find Sinister in one of his secretest of secret labs. And it's here where we jump in, where we find Sinister checking logs, as well as a calendar that lets him know of a significant event taking place today. And we'll get into some of the how before this is done. But for now, Sinister's been made aware that this day is a significant day, and with him seeing what is taking place today, he reminds himself to make sure to act surprised, as if he didn't already know what's about to happen. And it's just after this where we follow Sinister to the Quiet Council meeting, and we find that this day is the day that Magneto left the Quiet Council to make his way to Arakko. And man, it kind of hits the feels a little bit, because remember, this is taking place before Judgment Day. But as this happens, Sinister is kind of surveying the room to more or less get a kick out of everyone's reaction. Though unfortunately, due to Charles' Cerebro helmet, Sinister isn't quite able to see Charles' expression. But it's kind of funny what he says about Exodus, since he's now put Magneto on the same quote-unquote villain list as Sinister, which says a lot with how much Exodus hates him already, which mainly stems from the whole thing of Sinister becoming a mutant, with Exodus being very Old Testament about the mutant race. But nonetheless, Sinister's steering clear because he's terrified of the guy, and I mean for good reason. But then it comes to the point where Sinister notices Destiny staring at him, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh yeah, act surprised, and he just jumps up like, what? And he slams his hands on the table, only to then think to himself like, was that too much? Am I doing the most? But then the kicker really happens here when Emma Frost, who has been side-eyeing both Eric and Charles since the reveal of Moira McTaggart, but she then suggests that Eric be removed from the council effective immediately, which quickly goes into a vote that unanimously goes in Emma's favor. And with how this happens, it really just pushes Eric even harder to go to Arakko and eventually to join the Great Ring, because he knows there he's not going to get stabbed in the back. Because in Arakko, if somebody has a problem with you, it's their custom to take you head on rather than stabbing you in the back. But then from here, the Quiet Council, they then shoot through a number of different applicants to take Magneto's seat at the Autumn Table, like Warren Worthington III, Penance, Gorgon, Vulcan, Abigail Brand, as well as Hank McCoy. But even still, none of these guys were filling the shoes of Magneto. And other suggestions were made like Legion, but Charles quickly shot that down. But there's even talks of others who more or less declined, as well as suggestions of some of the Arakai, with Storm mentioning that she had talked to Sobinar, Lotus Logos, as well as Xylo, only for them all to respond that they're not interested. And at one point, Doug Ramsey is even solicited, but with him being the omni-linguist who's integrated with Krakoa, chances are it'll compromise everything. And it's for that reason that Doug Ramsey declines as well. But not too long after, Exodus makes his way to Hope Summers with the intention of asking her if she'd be interested, because hands down she's his first pick. And for Exodus, with him seeing Hope as the Jesus of the mutant church, he approaches her, of course, calling her Messiah. And with the way that he sees her, like, I just imagine in my mind him running in the room like, never would have made it. Oh, Messiah, it's so good to see you. But through his lens, with Hope raising the dead, through the resurrection process with the Five, nonetheless, he sees that as her raising the dead. And his argument is that she's given mutants their own heaven. But Hope's kind of like, no, those are backup drives. And at one point, he even talks about her being filled with the Holy Spirit. But then Hope's like, nah, you mean the Phoenix Force? And again, for Exodus, like, I just imagine he's like, I can't help it. I'm an acolyte. But eventually, Hope is just like, okay, what is it? What do you want? And a huge smile just fills Exodus' face, because now he gets to ask if she'll meet with the council and take that chair. But just after this, when we then head over to the council, we find that Selene is making her case for the position. And with her doing this, I'm not going to front. For the most part, it's a good case. But initially, she kind of comes for Destiny by letting the council know, even though she's sitting in the chair that was formerly held by Apocalypse, Destiny does not replace Apocalypse. And Selene's saying this because with them losing Magneto, they shouldn't be trying to replace him, but rather just fill his chair, much like they did after losing Apocalypse. But then as she continues, she then goes on with her strongest argument, with that being that no one else on the Quiet Council knows magic. And with Krakoa having borders with mystical realms, and with her knowing more magic than Apocalypse ever did, it makes her a valuable asset. But then just after this, her argument then starts to crumble, because she then mentions the Five's process of resurrection, and how with their pace, it'll take them a decade or so to bring back the people of Genosha, those 16 million people. While on the other hand, with her, she brought back Genosha in a day. But then right away, Kate Pride is like, but they were zombies though. And I'm gonna have to go with Kate on this one. But also at the time, Selene used her mysticism to pervert the techno-organic virus. So even still, there's a bit of an asterisk on that. But for Selene, the way that she sees it, they weren't technically zombies. So for Selene, she sees it as a W. But then it's here where Hope shows up, telling the council that it needs to be her. It has to be her. Because as it stands, the Five are the foundation of Krakoa, and Hope lets the council know if the Five aren't being heard, or if they're worried about what's going on, that's a real problem. And Hope tells them that the Five need representation on the council, to where then Sinister's like, it sounds like she about to say or else. Like that statement sounds like it was going to be followed by an or else. And surely enough, as Hope leaves, she lets the council know that she doesn't think that the people are going to take it well if they hear that she was denied a seat, because all the people love the Five for obvious reasons, and if they deny Hope, you can only imagine how the people will respond. And God forbid the Five have a strike, then you'll have some serious problems. But then of course with Selene hearing this, she's upset because the Eternal Gate that reached Araco was made from the bones of her fellow Externals. So in a way, she feels like they owe her this. And for that reason, as she leaves, she then drops a bit of an or else, air quotes, herself, with insinuating the trouble that would come if the disruption gates went away. But soon after both Hope and Selene had left, Xavier called for a vote, starting with Hope. And it's here where Sinister is kind of like, yeah, these suckers, I know exactly how this gonna go. And just to make sure that he doesn't seem suspicious, he plans to vote against Hope to more or less cover his hand. Because with how he sees it, even with him voting no, Hope is still gonna win. And as the voting begins, Sinister is just saying to himself, like in his mind, what everyone's gonna vote before they even say it. So when it comes to him, he says no, and he's feeling confident. At least until it gets to Destiny, because she voted no when he thought she was gonna say yes. And the reason why Sinister thought that Destiny was gonna vote yes for Hope is because it was Hope who brought Destiny back. And now it has Sinister wondering if Destiny knows that he knows what he knows. But in addition to Sinister voting no, Storm then votes no. And with seeing this, Sinister has to quickly change his vote from a no to a yes, while giving the sketchiest last minute explanation, telling the council that he's thought it through and he thinks that they should give Hope a chance. And for Sinister, with him changing his vote to yes, this caused the ruling to be 6-5 in Hope's favor. And with the council adjourning, Sinister gets up and he's kind of like, okay, don't look at Destiny, don't give nothing away. But just after this, we then find that Charles has made his way to tell Selene the news, with letting her know that now's not the right time, but she can work with the council in partnership. And initially with Charles telling her this, she doesn't respond. But then shortly after, she then makes good on her or else statement earlier by resurrecting the gate and telling Charles that they're just gonna have to live with the consequences. And with seeing this rather quickly, the blame goes on Sinister, because him changing his vote at the last minute was that vote that tipped the scale. And I mean, had Sinister voted yes in the first place, perhaps people would have been looking at Exodus sideways. But with hearing this, of course, Sinister goes over to Destiny, asking her if she saw this coming. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, if anybody would have knew, I would think it would be either of them. But instead, when Destiny tells Sinister that Nightcrawler was right, as far as calling Sinister a fool, she then goes on to tell him, after all these years, you never learned how my powers actually work. I don't see the future. There is no the future. There is no destiny. Which are some choice words that we'll see have a significant meaning much later on. But after this, we see Sinister make his way back to his secretest of secret labs, of which the location we'll get to later. The name is very familiar, but with things going awry and Sinister knowing that he had missed something, he uploads the relevant details of this day from his brain because Selene shouldn't have escalated the situation today. But also, while Sinister's in here, can we talk about some of the weird stuff he has going on? Like this gun that he has that fires the clone eyeballs of Scott Summers? Like only Sinister. But also, while he's here, he mentions that combining mutant powers isn't always the answer, because sometimes all you need is just one. You take that one mutant, that one power, you isolate it, and you figure out the different ways that you can put it to use. And Sinister mentions that the problem is there's only one Earth, and you can't treat life as an experiment because someone can't just repeat their life. But imagine if someone could. If someone's consciousness could move back and forth through time to when they were born, when they died, they would be emulating that life if they did. And if by chance you had someone who could do this, and you were to clone them, and activate their X gene as time progresses, while uploading whatever you want into that clone's brain, to where after that, when you grow bored of the timeline, just kill the clone. But if you were able to do this, your earlier self could download whatever your future self had uploaded into the clone, allowing you to know a number of these future events. And with us hearing Sinister just go over this plan, it's here where we find that he has pulled this off by using multiple clones of Moira McTaggart. And man, with seeing this, it only gets crazier. Alright, so for this one, we pick up not long after the Quiet Council held their meeting to determine who would take the open seat that was left by Magneto. And like we'd seen, after considering a number of prospects, it wasn't before long when Selene had become the frontrunner, with her making it clear that if she was selected, then she would be the only member of the Quiet Council who knew how to use magic, which like we'd seen was a convincing argument. But when Exodus convinced Hope that she should go for it, she then came right in, implying that it needs to be her, with her being a member of the Five, of whom none are members of the Council. But nonetheless, this led the Council to choosing Hope over Selene. And as a result, out of spite, Selene animated the Araco Gate, which was the equivalent of just dropping a kaiju on the shores of Krakoa. And really, not only was this Selene doing this out of spite for the Council picking Hope over her, but also this was very much Selene saying, okay, you don't have a magic user on the Council. Here's a huge reason why you should. And not only that, but with Selene creating this huge problem, she doesn't bother to stick around. Because it isn't like she's doing this to change their minds and get the Council to choose her so that then she'll change it back. No, this is her reaction and she's leaving them with it. And to take it a step further, we find that she's already made her way to London to take refuge amongst the Covenant Kaba. But back in Krakoa, it's here where we find Hope leaping into action while telling the other members of the Five to get the Krakoan civilians to safety. But also in this moment for Hope, it's a bit of her switching gears and getting back into who she knows herself to be, which is a leader, a fighter, and even though she hasn't taken full ownership, or much of any ownership for that matter, of the Messiah title, she does know that she needs to get back to being more hands-on. But then from here, we find Storm and Magneto stepping in, since they were still here. And Magneto kinda jokes about it with him recently stepping down from the Quiet Council, with him saying that it's a good thing that he didn't just huff and rush out of here. Which is true, but at the same time, he's not gonna see this and not help. But with Magneto and Storm working together here, and doing the classic 1-2 combo, with Magneto throwing all kinds of metals into the Araco Gate, and Storm using them as conductors, it's here where we also find that Hope is observing and mentioning how this is just an example of how much more powerful their people are together. Because either Storm or Magneto could single-handedly take down a creature of this magnitude, given the time. But with the two of them working together, they're able to swiftly give it a critical blow. And really, in any other circumstance, that would have killed it. But it's here where they find that Selene's magical creature is just reforming itself after what should have killed it. But at this time, Emma Frost links Destiny to everyone, with Destiny getting somewhat frantic and having trouble forming her words, with her vision of the future just continually warping and changing. But at this point, with everyone connected, Dr. Nemesis informs Magneto and Storm that because this creature is literally the Araco Gate, it's connected to multiple dimensions, so when they attack it, the damage is dispersed through multiple gateways. And to take it a step further, if they destroy it, that destruction can go through Otherworld into everywhere, which really makes the situation much more complicated, because on one hand, you can't destroy the gate without things going boom everywhere, and then on the other hand, you can't just leave this thing on the shores of Krakoa, because it's going to annihilate everything in its path. But at this point, with Hope trying to lead a number of civilians to safety, or at the least further away from this thing, Exodus makes his way to Hope, telling her that she needs to get out of there because she's too important to be at risk, you know, with her being the Messiah and everything. and with Exodus trying to get Hope out of there. She tells Exodus that she's not going to leave anyone behind, to where then he's like, I can't save everyone. And it's here where Hope does something that she's definitely done before, and I kinda wish that she would do more often, but she uses her powers to mimic the powers of Exodus so both of them can hold this thing back together. And it's pretty nuts cause for Exodus, of course, he has a laundry list of powers, including teleportation, energy shields, concussive blast, telekinesis, just to name a few. But also for Exodus, his powers are amplified when more people believe in him or his belief in himself increases. So now with Hope borrowing these powers, as well as the belief system buff, which for her it's even crazier because she's Hope Summers, the first mutant born after M-Day, the savior mutant kind. And on top of that, with Exodus being one of her biggest fans, or followers, however you want to put it, this also boosts her confidence in herself, which on top of everything makes the combination of these two even more powerful. But then from here we head over to Mr. Sinister, who at this point has made his way back to his secret lab. And with him coming here, he makes his way to his gene closet for a special little something that he can use in order to quote unquote save the day. But of course, we know Sinister's only stepping out there to help because he had his predictions on how this day was supposed to go, and this gate turned magical kaiju is jeopardizing his progress and his plans for how things in the near future are supposed to play out. But then it's here where we see Sinister inject himself with this gene concoction that immediately transforms him into this ridiculously large hulking figure. And with him quoting Nietzsche, who once said, "Fight not with monsters lest you become a monster," and Sinister's like, you know what, bump that. If you're going to fight with monsters, you should become a monster and be the best and biggest monster that you can. But right away, with Sinister taking the fight to this thing, Xavier reaches out and he asks Sinister, what exactly is he looking at? And it's here where Sinister lets him know that he had injected himself with an early Chimera prototype full of a bunch of different mutant genes merged with an MGH base and some Arakai spice. But then he just tells Charles that it's nothing to worry about because it's from a very bespoke area of his work, and it took him weeks to make even this dose to more or less make it sound like, oh no, this concoction, it isn't threatening and it's nothing to worry about. And of course, with Charles hearing this, he asks Sinister if he's going to make it worse. And in response, Sinister tells Charles the plan, which is really just for him to grab this thing and take it out further into the water away from Krakoa, because in the next 6 seconds, his pseudo kaiju body is going to explode. And as he pulls the creature out further away, he lets Charles know that he's gonna need a pickup, because when he's done, he's just gonna be out there in the water with what's left of this thing. And he knows that it's gotta be quick, because as he's floating out there, he sees this thing reforming at a rate that he finds rather impressive. So if he's out here long enough, this thing will be back and ready to eat him up. But with Sinister doing this, it was really just a way for him to buy Krakoa time. And while he's out here, fortunately, it isn't long before Nightcrawler shows up, bamfing to him and then bamfing Sinister back to shore. And when this happens, we kind of get this moment here where Sinister tells Nightcrawler that he can't exactly change his past, but surely he's as committed as anyone else to Krakoa and its well-being. And even if Kurt isn't grateful of him, he lets him know that he's grateful that Kurt bamfed out here and came to his rescue. And with Sinister saying this, Kurt pauses for a moment, but then he gives Sinister the thumbs up with him saying, well done, you bought us time. But then as he leaves, Sinister just pretty much calls him a sucker, with him saying that it's the people who think the best of others who are just the easiest to convince. But then it's here where we find that Charles has called an emergency quiet council meeting so that they can come to a solution of what to do about this undying creature that Selene has just dropped on them. And really through the course of this meeting, they come to the conclusion that they're gonna have the Krakoa captains slow it down, but without killing it, while also reaching out to Selene in an attempt to negotiate and see what it is that she wants. And I mean, that's one of those things where we know that's not a good option. It's not a good plan, because aside from Selene just proving her point, she doesn't have the expressed desire to negotiate. And at one point, we even see that Destiny realizes what Selene is doing. But also through the course of this meeting, we come to find out that Scott Summers has a protocol for everything, including kaiju attacks. And to me, the funniest thing about this Summers protocol for delaying kaiju is really how specific it is, with it also including footnotes that cite references to other protocols just to make sure that he was thorough. And it's funny to me because you can tell that he put a lot of time into this, amongst many other protocol entries. But shortly after this meeting, it's here where we find that none of those protocols are really gonna matter, because it's here where Destiny approaches Hope and tells her that at 1900 hours, Greenwich mean time, Selene will stop by a window in London, she'll stand there for a second, and then she'll die. And Destiny even goes a step further to give Hope the address in this specific location of where this is going to happen. And for Hope, with her hearing this, she asks Destiny, because she knows that Destiny can only see probable futures. But with hearing this, she asks Destiny, what are the chances of this actually happening? And Destiny's response is that it is significantly higher after this conversation. And it's funny because for Hope, after this conversation, she's pretty much like, oh, you want me to go kill her? Like she ain't get it right away. But shortly after, she gets right to it. And she does this by first creeping up behind Magic and stealing her ability to create portals, because honestly, if she used Nightcrawler, she would have been mad late. But with doing this, she makes her way to Greenwich so that when the time comes at 1900 hours in 7 minutes sharp, she has Selene in her sights, and as soon as Selene steps into that window, Hope squeezes. And just like that, she sends one shot straight to Selene's dome. But at this point, with there being no time for teabagging, Hope makes her way back to Krakoa because this job isn't finished quite yet, because Selene's creature is still reforming and it is still a potential threat. So for Hope, with her continuing with her plan, she goes through with Selene's resurrection at Arbor Magna, but with Selene just being reborn more or less. She's still disoriented and of course missing some of her more recent memories. But as soon as Selene comes out, Hope has Exodus use Selene to find the off switch for her monster, and now with doing this, the job is done. To where then Exodus just cracks Selene's neck, and then the job is like done. But after this, we then find Hope making her way to the Quiet Council and explaining to them that she didn't break any of the laws here. And for the most part, the council agrees with her actions because worse decisions have been made. But also, some of them even go further to say that Selene broke the law of respecting the sacred land and she should be put in the hole right away. But then eventually Charles asks Hope if Selene was at the top of the resurrection queue, would she bring her back? And for Hope, she intentionally tries to respond to this the calmest way that she can. And she tells Charles that she thinks that they should table this discussion for now, which really puts Selene's resurrection on the back burner. But after this meeting, Hope tells Exodus more or less that this whole rodeo just proves that she's not the Messiah, because Jesus wasn't running around busting at the ops. But in response, Exodus tells Hope that it's for this reason why she's a better kind of Messiah. And of course, Hope nudges Exodus like knock it off, like he's joking. But Exodus doesn't even crack a smile, like he said that straight face. But then it's from here where we find that Sinister's approached Destiny, mentioning the idea of bringing Selene back to get more answers. But then Destiny tells him that that's not going to end well for him, because like she told him before, they must be on the same side. And when Charles hears the latter end of this, he asks Sinister what exactly Destiny was talking about. And Sinister tells Charles that he doesn't know, because Destiny's never told him such a thing. And really with this happening, it's us beginning to see the signs of Sinister's actions with him messing with the timeline, and it's giving Destiny a bit of clairvoyant vertigo. And we see this happen again when Destiny tells Mystique that she's still feeling strange after the incident with Selene's creature, when she hasn't felt this way in over a century. And after that, she then falls to the ground saying, you're a ghost, repeatedly. Just like what we'd seen in issue 1 when we were given the flashback with her and Sinister in Paris in the year 1919. And I know, it may sound a little wild and trippy at the moment, but as we continue through this, Sinister's plan is going to begin to make a lot more sense. Alright, so when we jump back in, we continue from what we'd seen, with Destiny having the overload of possible futures just take her down. And from what we've seen already, we know that this is because of Sinister, with him figuring out how to manipulate timelines by way of cloning multiple Moira McTaggarts to use her power to reset to a new timeline upon her death, which gives Sinister countless opportunities to start fresh at any point by just killing Moira and starting over, while retaining his previous memories. And with Destiny being a precog, these new futures that Sinister either will create or possibly will create, they cause Destiny to reset. But initially when Destiny goes down, we're given a bit of a flashback with her talking about how her mutant power first activated when she was 13. And with how this is done, we're shown a ton of her first visions coming through all at once, with her seeing clockwise here Days of Future Past, the Phoenix, Krakoa, the early Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, the Shadow King, and even the original X-Men coming together. But on one hand, with us seeing her see this future, we're initially being told a story that jumps through Destiny's younger years. But also, I want you guys to keep in mind how for Destiny in this flashback, she sees the previous possible futures that she is known to see for many years. But also, I want you guys to keep in mind what Kieran Gillen has done here, because amongst these futures that Destiny has always seen, Krakoa is included, and that's an important part that we'll get to in a little bit. But as we continue, Destiny goes on to mention how with her mutant power being activated, she knew that it wasn't but a matter of time before she would lose her practical vision as well. And she goes on to mention how in the beginning, she was very critical about her time, and it was for this reason that she would write and continue to write, describing the things she had seen with a mixture of truth and lie, with the intentions of concealing certain information from others. But at the time, she had wrote 13 volumes in 13 months, until the last thing that she ever saw with her mortal eyes was the last line of her final volume. But for Destiny, this was her just getting started. And from here, when we jump forward into the present day, Destiny would describe what she's going through like it's her getting her powers for the first time, but multiple times over. And at this point, her wife, Mystique, is of course by her side, and she allows Emma Frost to gently scan Destiny, but she tells Emma if she pries too deep, then it's gonna be some problems. And that's me translating it nicely. But as soon as Emma does, she even feels tipsy, with her just seeing a glance of everything that Destiny's looking at. And she lets Mystique know that Destiny is in many elsewheres, being overwhelmed with many visions. But also at this time, Emma lets Mystique know that the two of them have to head to a quiet council meeting. And eventually Mystique agrees to go, because she knows that this isn't Destiny saying goodbye, or some type of situation where it was bad enough that she would die without the option of coming back, because if it was anything close to that, she would have warned Mystique. So for Mystique, as hard as it is to walk away in the moment, she knows that she can step away. But with the two of them heading to the quiet council meeting, Mystique shares with Emma that she doesn't trust Charles. And really it's not a surprising thing, and Emma even responds telling Mystique that a lot of us don't. But nonetheless, there's a bit of an understanding between the two of them heading into this meeting, where Emma knows that she needs to respect both Destiny and Irene's privacy, or else there'll be consequences and repercussions. But from here, when we go back to Destiny, we find that she's revisiting the moment when her and Mystique first met. And for Irene, this is really important, and not only for what they would go on to be, but also for what Mystique would mean to her, with Mystique becoming her first crucial nexus. And from here, Destiny goes on to explain how her precognition works and also how she navigates through it. And the simple part is she's able to see the future, but the further off events are, those predictions or those visions, they become more of a possibility. But on the flip side, if it's something that's about to happen in the next 3 or 5 seconds, then she's able to call it out in remarkable detail. And this is something that very much came in handy back when her and Mystique were both members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, because back then Destiny would just be like, Colossus is coming through that wall in 3 seconds, and like clockwork, they could adjust or step aside and use that information to their benefit. And she goes on to express that this is pretty much how she's navigated her life. But because the further off future is really more of a possibility, this caused Destiny to be very intentional with any and every nexus, because all nexuses, depending on how they're handled, lead to a specific outcome, whether that outcome be for better or for worse. And for Irene, she knew that Mystique was necessary for her. They loved each other, Mystique completed her. But also Destiny understood that Mystique was a nexus, a necessary step to everything that she had to do. And she knew that a time would come when the two of them had to be apart for the future to actually happen. And that separation for the two of them would have to be Destiny's death. Because at the time, she knew in the future if she was around, there would be no Krakoa. And back then, she didn't know the reason why, but now she knows that reason was Moira McTaggart. And for Destiny, looking back on the moment of her death, she remembers the pain and sorrow of loving Mystique and leaving her alone. Much like the situation now with Mystique being by herself while Destiny's going through this. But at this point, when we jump back over to the Quiet Council, it's here where we find that they have filled in Hope on all the secrets of this island. And now with Hope getting caught up to speed with all this, she's like, why are these things secret? Why don't we just share all of this with everybody on Krakoa? And right away, Charles is more or less like, that's a dumb idea. And I gotta admit, I'm with Charles. Because if everybody on Krakoa knew everything, it would be chaos. And with Hope hearing this from Charles, she asks him why the pushback? And why did he give her a Cerebro helmet if he didn't want her more involved? And right there, Charles is like, I did no such thing. And right away, it's kind of like, uh-oh. Because really, what this is referring to is how Destiny came back during Inferno, when Mystique disguised herself as Charles and brought the Cerebro helmet to Hope, and with doing so, more or less telling Hope to do the honors. And I mean, at the time, it was undoubtedly deceptive. But nonetheless, this was the secret of how Mystique finessed Hope into restoring Destiny and completing her resurrection, which had previously been off the table at the request of Moira McTaggart. So of course, with this coming up now at the meeting, with Hope telling Charles that she remembers this specifically, and needless to say, it gets very messy. Because from here, Sinister then goes on to mention that he had a visitor who came to him at Bar Sinister and asked him for Destiny's DNA. And with him mentioning this, of course he knows what he's doing, but with mentioning, he says it like, oh my, there's a shapeshifter among us. It wasn't me, I wonder who it could be. As he changes his face to Mystique, which she doesn't like one bit. But then she goes on to tell everyone here that burning this place down was her other option. And for what it's worth, lying to a couple of people isn't as bad in comparison. But as the Quiet Council is arguing over the deception, which in Mystique's case, you can't really be too mad because it's more or less her mutant power. But when we go back to Destiny, who knows what's going on with Mystique since she had previously foreseen it, but it's here where we go back to Destiny where we find that her mind rushes out into a whole different layout of the possible future. And really it's here for Destiny when she sees this layout of the things that could be. It all appears to her much like the first time when she got her powers. And as all of this is shown to her, she also realizes that there's less of a future ahead. And initially she's not sure if this is because someone is trying to block her, or if this is truly all that is left before everything inevitably goes dark. But as she looks at the possible timelines, she notices that they all have a sharp ending, with each one of them stopping with a dramatic nexus. And even with there being paths of the mutants having huge victories, like the Nimrod extinction event, amongst others, it doesn't matter, because later on, even that timeline sees an abrupt ending. And it's here for Destiny when she then looks closer into the longest lasting timeline. She focuses on the furthest point out so that she can have a better understanding of what exactly is causing these abrupt endings. And it's here where she sees a fiery starship the size of an actual star catching a much smaller vessel, which is nearly completely covered with clone meat, which are referred to as Shaw batteries. And really, with her looking at something like this and seeing that somebody took the time to clone someone multiple times and wrap their flesh around a spaceship, and it's pretty clear to Destiny that there's only one person who would undergo such a project. And for her, to no surprise, she sees that the person who did this was none other than Mr. Sinister. But then it's here where she sees that this Phoenix-looking ship is actually Exodus, who at this point is larger than life because of the trillions of people who have put their belief in him. And at this point, he's caught Sinister, who he refers to as Judas Prime, to where then he sentences Sinister to a hell that is specially made for him, with it being filled with the souls that he had desecrated, and all of them waiting for Sinister with long psychic knives and a whole eternity to have their way with them. But with Destiny watching this insanity, she's hoping to get some kind of information from it that she can bring back to the present day. And with her seeing this, she more or less knows that she can count on Sinister, or better yet Sinister's ego, to cause him to say something that she can take back as a hint or a clue. And surely enough, Sinister's ego delivers, because just before he's devoured, Sinister tells Exodus that he'd already lost, and if Exodus kills him, everybody's gone, because he has a failsafe that will destroy the entire timeline. And just like that, he's devoured and everything goes dark. And with seeing this, Destiny's like, Sinister can't do that. Only Moira can. Then she's like, wait, no, Moira's gift can do that. And it's right here where she realizes Sinister cloned Moira. And from here, where we go back to the Quiet Council, we find that Charles is questioning Mystique's position on the council, and Kate Pryde reminds Charles that he's done some dirt too. But in Charles' defense, he lets them know that him, Eric, and Moira did what they needed to do to bring the mutants to paradise. While on the flip side for Mystique, he sees what she did as undermining their government and structures in pursuit of her own personal desires. But then it's right here where Destiny walks in, telling them that a war is coming, and if they really want to protect their schemed for utopia, then they ought to be thankful that Mystique brought Destiny back and curse anyone who was involved in keeping Destiny away. But it's funny because when Destiny says this, Emma's more or less like, well, let me look in your mind so I know it's real. And Sebastian Shaw's more or less like, yeah, I agree, because I'm tired of being manipulated. But Destiny quickly says that she doesn't trust any of them in her head. And really, that's more important now than ever. Because if Sinister knows that Destiny knows what she knows, with her being aware of what he's up to, then he's just gonna kill Moira and reset. So understandably, Destiny has to be careful with handling this information. But from here we see Destiny and Mystique go back to their quarters. And when they do, Destiny goes to write down more about the new futures that she'd seen. And as she does, Mystique asks her about what she saw, to where then Destiny turns around, she asks Mystique, do you trust me? Which then goes on to Mystique saying, if every part of this world were to succumb to dusk, the last thing remaining would be my trust in you. And it really plays out a lot like their conversation in the flashback in issue 1. But this time around, Destiny tells Mystique that the writing could wait, and she spends the moment giving Mystique a bit more of that focus. To where then later she tells Mystique after she's finished writing her book, she doesn't want her to read it until the moment where she absolutely has to. But as Destiny sits down to write this book, it's here where we find that in all of those futures that she had seen, Mystique wasn't in any of them. And Destiny could care less about navigating a future that doesn't include the love of her life, who is also her first crucial nexus. Alright, so at this point, when we jump back in, it's said to have been a year since the events of the planet-sized X-Men one-shot, back when Magneto and a group of other mutants terraformed Mars, which would later be established as Planet Arakko. And this was something that we went much more into depth with during the Judgment Day event, when I did a bit of a run-through of the events leading into X-Men Red. But at this point with Immortal X-Men, we're going to be briefly passing through some of the events of the Hellfire Gala, as well as X-Men Volume 6. And as we continue, I'll be tying the references from those issues as they make their way into Immortal X-Men. But at this point, when we jump back in, we begin with Emma Frost, where in her case, she usually sleeps in her diamond form, but on the night before the Hellfire Gala, there's just way too much on her mind. And through the course of this, we follow Emma as her mind is racing and she's thinking about a number of things, some of which include her comparing herself to Jean, while also admitting that she knows why she's not quote-unquote up there with Jean. Which from there takes Emma into thinking about her snow phase, because Emma's got a past. She's done some cruel things. But again, for the most part, the reason why Emma's mind is racing and jumping from one thing to the next, it's mainly because of her having a mixture of nervousness and excitement for the Hellfire Gala. And on one hand, it's to be expected, because there's going to be guests from around the world as well as from across the galaxy. But nonetheless, because of Emma's anxiety, it's bringing a lot of old memories to the forefront, to where eventually we'll come to find that it's put her in a quite delicate state. But for Emma, one of the last things that comes to mind just before she dozes off is how this gala is going to be ushering in a new era, and it's a shame that they don't have a huge announcement like the terraforming of Mars that happened last year, because that was big, with mutants bringing life to what was otherwise a dead world. But now, alongside of the gala, there's no huge story to break. And from here, Emma then goes on to think about the article written by Ben Urich, who's the reporter that had discovered that the mutants had figured out immortality. And for a moment, Emma thinks of it like, yeah, well, this would have been nice if it happened after the gala. And she's imagining if this was something that the mutants wanted to share or present, it would have been nice if it was the Hellfire Gala's one more thing. But also, while we're on the topic of the world knowing about the mutants' resurrection, this is something that Ben Urich has been suspicious of for some time, and for a while he would ask Cyclops a number of questions, which eventually led to him asking about the X-Men going up to space and dying up there, only to later show up on Earth like nothing happened. But then later Urich was given his confirmation by Dr. Stasis, who had given him records of an autopsy that was done on Scott Summers, who Ben had just spoken to a few days ago. And later on, we would see that the very public death of Scott Summers had pretty much been the catalyst of the X-Men's big secret getting out, because even though the mutants had tried to cover up the return of Cyclops, with him being Captain Krakoa and putting Captain Krakoa with the X-Men, soon after things had kind of went left, because we discovered that Synch had just reacted after the public death of Cyclops. And because he didn't know that Scott was going to make an attempt to reach out to Ben Urich, Synch borrowed Jean's powers and he erased Urich's memories of what he knew about mutant resurrection. But of course, with him doing this, his intentions were good, but shortly after he would discover that the initial article that Urich was going to write was a positive one, with much admiration for the X-Men, with it saying that they were an example to mutants everywhere. But later Synch went to Urich with Cyclops, and he came clean, telling Urich that he could give him those memories back, but Urich declined and told the two of them that he wanted to go on and write the article without being given an interpretation of his own interpretation. So from there, he went on to put out the article, and from how it read, for the most part it seems like what he would have put out anyway. But then after this, fast forward to Judgment Day, and it was here where we saw like the peak of humanity's pushback, at least until they found someone else to be mad at, which not too long after was the Eternals. But from here, going back to Immortal X-Men, when we follow Emma, for her it comes to a point where she's like, what's the worst that could happen? To where then we fast forward to after the gala and we find Emma covered in blood. But it isn't long before we're shown what exactly happened earlier that night, because as Emma was leaving, she was approached by Ambassador Ming-Yu, who asked for a moment of Emma's time, but she just continued walking, telling him that she was busy. To where then he went on to say, with what? Immortality? Because the mutants gave humans medicine that would extend the human's life 5 years. Meanwhile, the whole time, mutants were hiding immortality. And at first, Emma continues to go on her way, while telling the ambassador that they can talk about this another time. But then he insists, no, now is the right time. And he goes on to tell her how it could be helpful for others, and how with this, mutants have something that everyone wants. And Emma goes on to tell him more or less that it isn't a gift that they can just wrap up and hand over to somebody. It's a limited resource, and it's not a technology that can be duplicated. But with the public news also being that it only works on mutants, it's here where the ambassador's like, is that something that's by choice, like it won't work, or the mutants just don't want to share? And it's here where she cuts him off and just says, over 16 million mutants. dead, which of course is a reference to Genosha and all the mutants that were killed by Mega Sentinels that were produced by Master Mold. But she goes on to tell him that 16 million mutants were murdered, and humanity just sat by and watched. And some of humanity even cheered. And on top of that, there were some people who even made a profit off of selling the parts that manufactured the Sentinels. But with saying this, she goes on to tell him that her people come first. And for Emma, her points are very valid, and the ambassador even tells her that he understands her position. But then he goes on to propose that the mutants give access to their leaders, key donors, industry figures, and he goes on to let her know that at the end of the day, Krakoa has made deals to secure its future, and doing this wouldn't be too different. And with hearing this, Emma looks over her shoulder and she lets him know that she'll take it to the council. But then in front of her, someone calls her name, and before she knows it, she's covered in sheep's blood. But just after this happens, Emma scans this woman's mind, and come to find out her husband had died not too long ago in a boating accident. And for Emma, with her touching this woman's mind, she feels what that woman feels, and she knows that something has to be done so that hopefully this type of outlash can go away. And after this, we then jump over to the Quiet Council meeting, where at this point, Emma has shared with the council her conversation with the ambassador and how the idea of sharing more with humanity could benefit Krakoa. But when she does, Sinister gets up and he is so sincere. And he's like, hey, perhaps this is an opportunity. Because if the world leaders will let me clone them, I can meddle with their genes a little bit, and I can even put a kill switch in each one of the world leaders. But not too long after hearing this, Charles is just pretty much like, man, sit your sinister ass down. Talk about putting kill switches in people's heads. But also, speaking of sick people, it's here where Charles lets everyone know that he had just got news about a man who had injected himself with the mutant growth hormone to only then kill himself because he believed that he would come back as a mutant. And with Charles sharing this information with everyone, initially the room is just speechless, but then Exodus is like, we can't be blamed for humanity's stupidity, to where the Nightcrawler's like, man, come on, somebody died. You gotta feel some type of sympathy or even empathy because this one guy could be the beginning of many. But then in response, Mystique tells her son, with him having all this talk about humanity, like, are you sure that you should be on a mutant council? But then Sebastian Shaw quickly chimes in and he tells Mystique that at the least, she should understand that this is bad PR for the mutants. And even if she doesn't care, at least look like it in public. But also Shaw believes that this is something that they could potentially turn for a profit. But then it's here where Emma tells Shaw and the others that they should more or less put a pin in this discussion because there's something else that she wants to bring to their attention before they go any further. And moving forward, Emma gets confirmation from the other psychics in the room for them to confirm that what she's about to share is valid and that they are indeed memories from Scott Summers' mind. And going forward, Charles, Exodus, and even Sinister concurs that they are. And it's from here where Emma goes on to show them the recent update of the fight between the X-Men and Dr. Stasis. And with what Emma's sharing, this takes us over to X-Men Volume 6, where throughout that whole series, Dr. Stasis has been stepping in and out of the shadows, with him seeing Krakoa as a cancer to the world that needs to be removed. But rather than him staging some full-on attack, he at first had a fixation on figuring out how the mutants were resurrecting their dead. And throughout this series, not only were we shown that he had conducted this autopsy on Cyclops, the one that he had handed over to Van Urich, with the intentions of discovering the secrets of mutant resurrection, but also with the very public death of Cyclops that we had talked about earlier. Not only was this attack staged by Dr. Stasis with the intent of killing Cyclops, but also with him watching this attack from nearby. When he noticed that Cyclops wasn't killed, he stepped in under the disguise of an ambulance worker and he finished the job himself, with him first telling Cyclops that they'll try a little experiment, with Dr. Stasis telling him exactly where he could find him so that he could see if Cyclops would remember when he came back. And later on in issue 11, we would come to find that Cyclops would go after Dr. Stasis, but with using the help of Synch, who had borrowed both the powers of Jean Grey and Wolverine, with Wolverine's senses helping them track down the specific location of Dr. Stasis. But at one point, with the scent of one of his henchmen going towards the right and the scent of Stasis going towards the left, Cyclops and Synch split up. And when Cyclops found Dr. Stasis, things escalated rather quickly. But then also it was this fight between the two of them that led Summers to hitting Dr. Stasis in the face numerous times, to where then finally Scott shot Dr. Stasis at point blank range with his optic blast, destroying his helmet and finally revealing his face to be Mr. Sinister, with a club on his forehead instead of a diamond. And as we continue, we'll dive deeper into the details of Dr. Stasis and the other Sinisters as well as their origin. But at this point in time, with Emma revealing the memories of Scott Summers to the entire council, including Mr. Sinister, the one who's been with the council, it's here where she goes on to tell them that the Sinister from Scott's memories, Dr. Stasis, he claims to be the original Sinister. But with Emma showing this to the entire council, including Diamond Sinister, the Sinister we've known for the longest, it's here where he's just at a loss for words. So then next, he just drops a BAMF bomb, which was undoubtedly crafted from Nightcrawler's abilities, but Sinister tweaked it so it's heavy on the brimstone smell. So there's plenty of sulfur to give it a whole lot more of that rotten egg scent. And of course, you know Nightcrawler's taking that as an insult, and rightfully so. But shortly after, with Sinister making his escape, it isn't long before Exodus spots him in the crowd. So then from here, Sinister then takes a few pills, which then give him the abilities of Matthew Madrox, the Multiple Man. And from here, members of the council just start taking down all these different Sinisters, which was kind of fun to watch for a moment with multiple Sinisters getting beat up or struck by lightning. But we would find out soon after this that the real Sinister was actually getting away. But before he can make his way through the gate that would take him to a secret lab, he turns around and he finds Destiny right there. And with how this is done, she could have got the drop on him, but instead she gets his attention and she asks him, "Don't you want to know what's going on?" To where then she tells him, "You can't run from this, don't be a coward." But in response, Sinister is just like, "Well, thanks for the food for thought, it was nice catching up." He shoots at her, she jumps out the way, and he just goes on through the gate. But as it turns out, with Destiny really more or less letting Sinister get away, she's trusting Sinister, or more or less hoping, that he'll respond or react to what she said, and not panic and go kill one of his Moiras and reset the timeline. And really for Destiny at this point, it's more of a waiting game. And over with Sinister, we see him put the gun to Moira's head, but then he thinks it through for a bit, and he realizes that Destiny could have got the drop on him, but for some reason she let him go. And with him thinking this over, he knows that she knows something, but he's not sure what it is exactly that she does know. But after going back and forth with himself, eventually Sinister reluctantly decides not to go through with destroying the timeline, and he makes his way to go back. But before he does, for safe measures, he does a bit of a personality purge and clean install so that when he goes back, he'll be able to do a bit of a performance and convincingly persuade the council that he's not up to anything and that he sincerely wants to clear his name. And really for Sinister, this is partially true, because on one hand, he does want to learn more about this other Sinister, but also he wants to keep his Moira project a secret. But from here we see Sinister come back to the Quiet Council and turn himself in, and give them this whole speech about how he wants to clear his name, and how he wants to cooperate and figure this whole thing out. But then all of a sudden this glowing light takes form under him, and before anyone can do anything, Sinister is kidnapped by the Eternals, and this right here takes us into the events of Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals Judgment Day, which I have a link to down below in case anyone needs to get caught up, or if you want to see more about how Sinister's story continued throughout Judgment Day. Alright, so in our last talk, with us seeing the Quiet Council being made aware of the true identity of Dr. Stasis, who turned out to be another Sinister with a club-shaped symbol on his head instead of a diamond, who also claimed that he is the original Nathaniel Essex. So of course with seeing this, Diamond Sinister panicked and he made off with the intention of backing up his memories, killing one of his test tube Moiras, and resetting the timeline. But like we'd seen, Destiny was able to intercept him just before he did, so that with a few words, she can drop just enough doubt in his mind to persuade Sinister not to kill Moira and keep this timeline intact, if for no other reason than to stick around and figure out the mystery behind this other Nathaniel Essex. But from here, to be on the safe side, Sinister did a personality purge with him not being certain if Destiny or anyone else was aware of what he'd been working on. So taking this route, his intention is to keep any psychics, or really anyone for that matter, from picking up his telepathic scent, so to speak. And right after this, just like we'd seen, he made his way back to the Quiet Council, turning himself in, only for him then to get bailed out by conveniently being abducted. And I say conveniently mainly because Sinister was very much in a pinch, but at this time with him being abducted by Ajax and Makari heading into the Judgment Day event, this took the immediate focus off of Sinister and onto the event that seemed like it was potentially going to be the end of the world. And these events for the most part take us from Immortal X-Men issue 4 to Axe Eve of Judgment, all the way through to Judgment Day issue 1, where not only did we see Druig unleash the Hex, but also was here with Ajax and Makari, revealed to Tony Stark that they had taken Sinister with the intentions of getting his help to build a new god. And in Judgment Day issue 1, we're shown Druig using the Unimind to attack the Quiet Council in Krakoa, which then leads into Immortal X-Men issue 5. And out of the 3 issues that we're flying through for this one, issue 5 really has nothing that we haven't covered already. because this whole issue really just focused on the attack against Krakoa, and from start to finish, the present day events also take place in Judgment Day issues 1 and 2. But I will say though, with how this was done in issue 5, with us seeing this attack from the perspective of Exodus, which was then followed by the Hex attacking Krakoa, it was pretty fun running through those flashbacks with Exodus in that issue. But from here, going into Immortal X-Men issue 6, I want you guys to keep in mind that the attack on Krakoa happened at the same time as the attack on Arakko that was served out by Uranos, which also included the epic face-off between him and Legion. And it's crazy how for weeks we didn't know what happened in this fight between the two of them, because at first all we saw was that both of them go up and only Uranos came down. But from here, continuing with the events that bridged between Immortal X-Men issues 5 and 6, it was around this time when the Avengers stepped in, making their way to Krakoa to help the mutants fight off the Hex, while over at Avengers Mountain, Sinister agrees to get started on helping Ajak, Makkari, and Tony in the hopes of building a new god and praying for change by bringing back the progenitor, but instead they were blessed with a death sentence and 24 hours to get their life right, which then led to a ton of people getting judged and some seeing it way quicker than others. But from here, this takes us into Immortal X-Men issue 6, where at this point, with the world having 24 hours before it is judged in its entirety, Tony, Ajak, Phastos, and Makkari began to brainstorm on a plan on how to stop the progenitor before time ran out. And it was here where Tony's showing them the internal node that would break apart the progenitor, where we saw Sinister take this information and share it with Destiny. In the back at the time when we were covering Judgment Day, we knew that Sinister did this, but it was during Immortal X-Men where we got a better look at why Sinister did this, because at the time Sinister reached out to Destiny, who immediately told him that they could use his help back in Krakoa, with the island currently being attacked by the Eternals. Because again, Sinister really needs to prove his allegiance with this whole Dr. Stasis conspiracy going on. But it's here where Sinister lets Destiny know that that is precisely what he's doing, because it's recently come to his attention that the progenitor has an off switch, but the people who know are either too scared to use it or they're just too dumb, and they're waiting out this judgment hoping that the world will pass after even Captain America failed. And Sinister went on to tell Destiny that if no one else, the mutants have to do this. So from there, he told her exactly where they needed to strike, and while Tony and the others were too distracted arguing, Sinister then opened the hatch to let the X-Men in. But like we'd seen at the time, even this plan didn't go well, because even though it was a good one, the heroes had soon after discovered that this entire time, it all was an illusion and it was just a test that most people failed. And for anyone who was involved or agreeing to do this attack, it was pretty much an automatic failure on their part, unless they were somebody like Kate Pryde, who intentionally didn't decide just to be on the safe side. And on the other hand, you had some like Destiny who had failed anyway. And for her, it's not even for the attack, but instead, the progenitor shows up to Destiny in the form of Mystique, and it tells her that she failed for lacking moral resolve, lying about her gift, and even her fear of losing Mystique. Because like we'd seen for Destiny, when she was writing in her journal, she said that she did not see Mystique in any of her future visions, and that fear has caused Destiny to move different, and that got her the thumbs down. And for Destiny, what the progenitor goes on to tell her here, it hits her hard because she knows it to be true, because the progenitor lets her know that it hopes that her peers have greater moral fortitude than her, because if they don't, this island, Krakoa, and this world will burn. And again, it's tough for Destiny hearing this because she knows the most likely ending, but we'll get back to that in a little bit, because like we'd seen, the judgment didn't stop there. Emma Frost also got the thumbs down, as well as Sebastian Shaw, because in his case, in Immortal X-Men issue 6, the progenitor shows up to him in the form of Emma Frost, and it throws him off because from what others described from their experiences of being judged, the progenitor would appear to them in the form of somebody they either feared or respected. And for Shaw, initially he believed that the progenitor would visit him in the form of his father, who Sebastian remembered as a very busy man who wouldn't give him much of any time or attention. And I like how in Immortal X-Men we're given this flashback where Shaw remembers his father telling him to more or less get out of his face until Sebastian has $1 million to his name to offer him, which was really messed up. But just after this, we then jump to years later, after his father had passed, where Sebastian had taken the first $1 million that he had earned. He pours it on his dad's grave and he burns it. But he makes it clear that he's not doing this like the medieval church, who used to let people pay off the sins of the dead in hopes of their loved ones' souls being spared in the afterlife. No, but instead Shaw's like, yo, whoever down there making that hellfire hot, here goes $1 million for somebody to turn them flames all the way up. And I can't help but to think that somebody heard that prayer, and poor old Jacob Shaw's been toasting ever since. But with seeing this for Shaw, not only is it a reminder of why Shaw is the businessman that he is today, but also how there could still be a bit of fear in him, not so much of his father, but of himself repeating the sins of his father to his own son. But nonetheless, for Shaw, he thought the progenitor was going to appear to him in the form of his father, Jacob Shaw, but also with him being judged. He didn't get so much of an explanation. The progenitor just popped up, giving the thumbs down, and dipped out. And the progenitor was like, I gotta go. Got a lot of people to judge, gotta make this quick. But with Shaw getting the thumbs down, the judgment was not surprising. Even with it coming off the heels of him saving Exodus, who was failing his quote-unquote test miserably, with Exodus being shown Eobard Garrickton, his close friend in the 12th century, the Black Knight, who is now offering Exodus to take his place in hell. And on one hand with seeing this, it's really dramatic. But then on the other hand, where you have it narrated by Sebastian Shaw, who's more or less like, look at this idiot, who, make no mistake, is burning in this hellfire. But Sebastian's like, we can't lose our big gun over some BS like this. So he walks straight into the hellfire and he saves him. And again, it isn't like this one moment of Sebastian coming to the rescue in his birthday suit that's going to magically redeem him all of a sudden. But instead, with how this is done, we're not only shown the complexity of his character, but also with the example of him saving Exodus, which was him doing a good deed with a selfish motive, and it's pretty much the opposite of Destiny, who, like we've seen, she has the good motives, but the progenitor told her that in spite of that, her actions were seen as immoral. But then after this, also in Immortal X-Men issue 6, we're shown the return of Eros, who's making his rounds and talking to leaders all around the world, which we got a glimpse of during our talks on Judgment Day. But it's here where we find Eros telling Shaw that the mutants have to work out something with the humans because of the whole uproar about immortality, and it's here where Shaw thinks of how the progenitor appeared to him as Emma, and to himself he thinks about what he'd said, because he didn't understand how he could get a thumbs down from Emma Frost, because for the longest time he saw the two of them as the same. And even with her whole speech about doing it for the children, at the time Shaw was like, no, Emma does it for the same reasons that I do. She does it for the money, she does it because she thinks she's better than people, and she does it for the drip. Which goes back to the money so you can buy the drip, but you know what I'm saying. But for Sebastian Shaw, it's the thought of Emma giving him the thumbs down that influences him to do the right thing for the wrong reason again, which, like we'd seen, is the opposite of what the progenitor judged Destiny for, because he tells Eros that he agrees to help find a way for the mutants to make amends with the humans, but whatever that solution is, it needs to benefit Krakoa. And now this is Sebastian Shaw doing the I do it for the children dance. But also with Eros out of the exclusion and making his rounds, at this point we head into Judgment Day issue 4 territory, which is when we also got the death of Magneto, which went down super quick in Judgment Day issue 4. But in X-Men Red issue 7, it was given a bit more of the time that it needed, with us being told that there's no backup for him, and this death is final. Which, even still, I have my thoughts on because of some of the stuff from House of X and Powers of 10, and the conversation that Charles had with Forge about additional backups. But that was the Hickman era, and we'll have to wait and see if that even pans out. Because as it stands now, in the hands of Karen Gillan and Al Ewing, in Immortal X-Men issue 7, Charles only mentions that we cannot bring back Magneto without disrespecting his legacy. So it's not like he can't be brought back, but it's more so like in these final hours, Charles is standing on the position of respecting Eric's wishes. But again, like I said, we'll see how long that lasts. But before we get too deep into issue 7 just yet, we gotta talk a bit more about what Sebastian Shaw is up to in issue 6. Because even with the end of the world being imminent, he wants to make sure that if for any reason that it doesn't end, that he set himself up to come out on top. And we see this when we go back to Shaw, who at this point goes from thinking about Emma Frost, the White Queen, over to his previous Black Queen, Selene, who at the beginning of this series, we saw Selene lose the hope for the seat that was left open by Magneto, to where just after, she animated the Araco Gate. And for Shaw, for some time, he believed that that was a bit much for Selene, and he eventually figured out that Selene had been working with someone. And for Shaw, because he's a businessman first, he needed to summon this someone and strike a deal of his own. And mind you, through the course of this, the conclusion of Judgment Day is still imminent, and Sebastian Shaw is meeting this stranger with the idea that if he does live to see the next day, then he is going to be seeing many other days after that, because with immortality, forever is a long time. And to go with that forever, he wants to make a deal that is going to make $1 billion look like pocket change. And towards the end of issue 6 is here where we're shown that this mysterious person who he's talking to is Mother Righteous. And in her case, in the near future, we'll be talking about how deep her ties really run. But for now, all that I'll say is that she's a magic user who's been around since the late 1800s. She's made a number of deals with people to where, aside from Selene and Sebastian Shaw, she attempted to make a deal with Legion in the pages of Legion of X, and that didn't work out. But she succeeded in making a deal with Sean Cassidy, Banshee, to where in his case, by acceptance, he was bound with the spirit of variance. But from here going forward, we're going to take it into issue 7. Which wraps up the connections of Immortal X-Men with Judgment Day. And at this point, in connection to the main series, we're landing at about between Judgment Day issue 4 and the beginning of issue 5, with Eros becoming Eternal Prime and making his way to the podium to plead with the Progenitor after meeting with leaders around the world. But also, at the time, like we'd seen, that little speech got them nowhere, because the Progenitor had already decided its judgment, and the heroes' options of making their way out of this alive, they started to seem slim to none. But back over in Krakoa, we head back over to the Quiet Council, who, once again, they are running slim on ideas, and at this point, even slimmer on time. And it's here where Charles mentions that bringing back Magneto is off the table because it'll go against Eric's wishes, but then Sinister's like, bump that. We need to make a swarm of Magnetos, like just pump out as many as we can and toss them all at the Progenitor. And I mean, I'm not gonna front, I would have liked to have seen that. But with Sinister saying this, he looks directly at Kurt and he tells him like, well, I thought you was about trying new things. And coming from Sinister, this really feels like a tease or even a taunt that's making fun of Kurt's progression throughout Ten of Swords and even Legion of X. And for Kurt, with him hearing this, for a moment he's like, you know what, maybe the Progenitor is right, and we don't deserve to live. But for Nightcrawler, even with the thought crossing his mind, he's not giving up. And with him noticing that Destiny has been super quiet this whole time, it's here where he bamps, snatches her up, and he takes her thousands of feet above the island, to where then the two of them free fall, and he lets her know that it's time for her to take a leap of faith. But right away, Destiny knows that Kurt is not gonna kill her. And really, it doesn't take any precognition to figure that out. But what makes this funny is that for a moment, Kurt's kinda like, well, I know it's obvious that I'm not gonna kill you, but you possess the gift of seeing possible futures. So tell me, what are the chances that I actually do? And I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he says it with a smirk on his face. And you can tell for Destiny that the chances of that were pretty high. But even still, with how this is done, it's not so much like a scare tactic, but instead it was more so Kurt getting Irene's attention and using the free falling as a bit of a parable or an example to show Irene that the same way that she was falling to her death and he used his gift to save her, she can do the same for the world, who's figuratively falling to their death, unless Irene steps in here and now and uses her gift to save everyone. And in response, she tells him that the path is narrow and uncertain and she does not wish to walk it. And Kurt lets her know, to be honest, none of us do, but he'll take every step that's needed with her, hand in hand. And it's from here where she lays out the plan for him, which arguably saves the world. Because first, she lets him know where he can find Captain America, to where from there, Kurt goes to Cap, he tells him the plan, Cap agrees, and like we'd seen before, Kurt bamps Captain America all the way to the North Pole. But along the way, Kurt takes a sample of Cap's DNA and he hands it to Magic, so that if the probable future happens where this goes wrong, after Cap gives his speech, then he can be resurrected. And like we'd seen, Captain America definitely needed that resurrection. But nonetheless, with the world hearing his speech, he became a martyr and the world united because of his sacrifice. But also with the death of Captain America, this plan shifted from plan A to plan B, which was the possible future that Destiny feared the most, because this involved a number of people staying in Krakoa and dying so that the Progenitor wouldn't know what they were up to. And amongst those people, this included Destiny and Mystique dying in each other's arms, which again is what the Progenitor told Destiny would happen. And Destiny knew that the two of them needed to die in order to cover up what everyone else was doing in the background. But before we get to that, I do also gotta say that Sinister, in the midst of all this, he tried to hit the reset button, but when he attempted to upload his memories so that he could take them into the next timeline, the upload kept failing. So when that happened, he was like, okay, bump it. I'll just go into the next life blind and I'll figure it out. So then he tries to kill Moira and the gun jams. And with one mishap after the other, Sinister does not get to hit the reset. And from here, we're then shown where Hope had taken members of the Five to New York and bring back Captain America, to where next we see Kurt team up with Magic to make his way to Orchis and send Moira McTaggart a message from Destiny from beyond the grave. And for Kurt, with him using Magic's portals to get to the Orchis space station and then teleporting Nimrod's shot into his own head, this then buys him time before Nimrod reassembles to convince Moira with this message from Destiny that if she doesn't get involved and help the mutants, then her soon coming death from the Progenitor in the next 3 minutes, it's going to be a permanent one. And for Moira, this is what convinced her to get Orchis to get involved and team up with the Avengers and the X-Men and the Eternals, who at this point, with Eros as Eternal Prime, everyone was on the same side. But also, the execution of this plan was crucial, because not only did it need to be a secret to the Progenitor, but also they needed all the firepower that they could muster to hold off the Progenitor while Tony and the others were inside, going after the node for real this time. But like we'd seen at the conclusion of Judgment Day, that plan had instead turned into Ajax and Tony convincing the progenitor to bring everyone back and restore the entire world and everyone who was killed except for Cersei. But at the conclusion, this had pretty much brought everything back to normal for everyone except for the Eternals. But I wanted to go back and just kind of fly through this with us covering Immortal X-Men, because I really felt like issues 5, 6, and 7 just needed one video. But after this, we're going back to the regular scheduled program. Alright, so for this one, we start off in 1943, where we find Mystique breaking into a US military research facility. And with how this is done, I see it as the other side to the story that we got in Immortal X-Men issue 3, when Destiny talked about her first time meeting Mystique, her falling in love, as well as Mystique being her first crucial nexus, which at the time was Destiny's narration, with Destiny telling her perspective. But this time with how it's done, we're hearing Mystique's side, with her expressing her experience of being in a relationship with a precog, who oftentimes doesn't tell Mystique what's going on. So again, it's like two sides of the same coin. And with Mystique sharing her experience, it's done in a way where it also ties into the larger narrative in this flashback, you know, like a story within a story. But with Mystique having her suspicions, this leads her to coming here by her own means, shape-shifting and making her way into Destiny's job so that she can find out what Destiny's been doing. And to get in, Mystique essentially just takes on the form of a pinup model to get the attention of the first couple guards and move in close enough to take these guys down. And for Mystique, it doesn't take too much for her to incapacitate these guys, because for her, even at this point in the early 1940s, it's very likely that she had been fighting longer than these guys' parents had been alive. And I say that because in X-Men Legacy issue 215, Mystique mentioned that she had been in solitude for 100 years, where during that time she never let anyone inside her guard. And really with hearing that, it's one of those things to where if you align that statement with the timeline of Mystique meeting Destiny in the mid to late 1800s, this would give you a modern day Mystique who's close to 320 years old. And that's putting her 100 years of solitude before she met Destiny, because clearly in the years after, with Destiny and Mystique being off and on, Mystique was definitely on, with a number of other partners and having multiple children. And last time I checked, that was the opposite of solitude. But once again, it's another one of these situations where it depends on the writer that you're dealing with, because according to Chris Claremont in Uncanny X-Men issue 170, which published March 8th of 1983, in this issue, Mystique had this crazy dream that sent her back to 1783, which was 200 years before that present day, and what was said to be 170 years before Mystique was born, which at the time in 1983, according to the OG source material, that would have made Mystique 30. And if you take it from there and bring it to today in 2023, 40 years later, and that'll make Mystique 70. So yeah, it makes it pretty tough to pinpoint her age as the years go on, but that's something I'll leave for you guys to debate in the comments. And I may also put up a poll in the community section and see which one of the votes take the cake. And I'll just let that be the ongoing investigation where you guys can decide what reference you're sticking to. But with getting back to the story, Mystique beats the mess out of these two guards to where she then takes on the likeness of one of them, using his appearance and clearance to make her way deeper into the facility, where she's surprised to find that Irene has been helping with experiments on mutant children. And at this point, Irene, or Destiny, she makes her way to find Mystique, because obviously she had foreseen Mystique coming here and making this discovery. And with finding Mystique, she initially tells her that she should leave before someone here finds her, but in response, Mystique refuses to leave without getting some kind of explanation. And in response, Irene tells her that she can't share everything, but what she does let her know is that this project is being led by Amanda Mueller, but the true power behind it is Dr. Nathan Milbury, who's actually Mr. Sinister, who had subtly but not so subtly kept the first name. And as it turns out, Sinister is gathering information on the mutant genome, which Irene goes on to say is crucial information, which on one hand, the quote-unquote crucial part of what she's saying goes back once again to issue 3 of this series when Irene spoke about crucial nexuses. But with mentioning this brief rundown to Mystique, she doesn't go too far into that, but rather she lets Mystique know that this is the reason why she's working here, so that she can keep an eye on Sinister's work and eavesdrop on the possible futures. Because at this time, Destiny knew, and also present day Mystique now knows, that this research will eventually benefit all mutants. But as they're walking and talking, and Destiny's explaining all of this to Mystique, she then goes on to let Mystique know that Sinister is going to hide his DNA in certain individuals, families with names like Shaw, Sullivan, Xavier, Marco, Ryking, and the list goes on, so that when he dies, he'll try to take them over. But at this point for Irene, she doesn't see that as a threat, because the futures that she's seen, they've shown for this method to be insufficient, and Sinister failing to pull them off. But even still, the two of them at this point, they know Sinister to be one to be clever and to cheat death. And as Mystique leaves, she thinks of the last time that her and Destiny had seen Sinister cheat death. And even though Mystique hasn't figured out how Sinister did it, she has a feeling that Destiny already knows that answer. But after this, it's here where we then go back 48 years to London in the year 1895. At 221B Baker Street, which really feels like Kieran Gillen is saying that Mystique has been the Sherlock Holmes of the Marvel Universe this whole time, which I guess before was already suggested, because at the time Mystique was in London, posing as a male consulting detective, who initially Destiny hired to help her decode the entries in her diary. And here it goes a step further to say that not only did Irene later work with Mystique, but she also used her mutant powers to make Sherlock Holmes seem like a genius. But it's here where Mystique brings to Destiny's attention the latest news article on the East London murders, where a lucky survivor, Nathaniel Essex, has been found beaten, confused, and stripped of his clothes. So the two of them head over to meet Essex and investigate. And with this being the first time that Mystique had met Nathaniel Essex, she describes her first impressions on his appearance, saying that he looks like a vampire who other vampires feed on. And looking at this guy, it's rather accurate, respectfully. But with them coming here to question Essex about the attack, he asked them to pardon the place for looking so diminished since his wife had passed, but when Mystique, or Sherlock Holmes at the moment, tells Essex that he must miss her, and in response Essex says no, not anymore. Because looking back, he wished that he hadn't wasted his time on love, and instead put more focus and dedication to his research, which at this point in time is mutants in the mutant gene, but he refers to them as Essex factors and Essex men. But with him being questioned about the attack, of which he was the only one who survived, all he says is that he was walking, he was attacked from behind, the root was disturbed, and he survived, which was a very suspicious story because this guy looks like he's 2 or 3 coughs away from the grave, and had this happened the way that he describes, it's likely that he'd been the first to go. And with hearing this, of course, Mystique, she has her suspicions, and Destiny offers to give Mystique a hint, but Mystique refuses because she wants to try something on her own first. And this is what then leads to Mystique walking the streets with the appearance of a helpless damsel, just walking and hoping that this creature would attack her, or anyone for that matter. But this then leads to her hearing a scream in a nearby alley, and when she turns the corner, she then meets Mr. Sinister, who at a first glance is undoubtedly the East London murderer. But seconds later, when Mystique shoots him in the head with an elephant gun, he just takes it and he climbs up the wall with a chunk of his dome missing, to where from there Mystique goes after him, and she makes her way to the rooftop to then see 2 moons in the distance. But as Sinister leaps from one rooftop to the next, she only gets close enough to find out where he's going, because a creature like this has to lay low somewhere in the daytime. And this yet again led her back to the home of Nathaniel Essex, where standing right outside is Destiny, who admits that she's quite curious and she wants to follow up on this revelation. And when they go inside, Sinister then transforms back into Nathaniel Essex, and as he reverts to his more frail form, he tells the ladies to stay back and how it's beyond their understanding, but then Mystique reveals to him that she's a mutant. And it's here where Nathaniel's like, oh, you're Essex men, and instead of correcting him for more desirable phrasing, they tell him that they are, and they ask Nathaniel Essex what is happening to him. And in response, the first thing that Essex says is, I should have never trusted the Egyptian, which of course is him referencing Apocalypse, who prior to this approached Nathaniel Essex because of his brilliant studies in human evolution, which even went as far as him predicting the uptick of mutant births that would come years later. But Essex goes on to explain to Mystique and Destiny the fact that Apocalypse recruited him and mutated him, giving Essex a number of abilities. But later, with Apocalypse out of the picture, these gifts that Essex had began to run wild as a result of Apocalypse no longer being there to keep him tame. And Essex even goes on to say that these gifts are physically killing him, and at this rate he's not sure if he's gonna live to see the 20th century, which for them at the time in this moment is like 5 years. But then Essex begins to ramble on about the war that he sees coming, and how one day there'll be machines that build other machines that build other machines, whether larger, smarter, or more powerful. And granted, amongst these ramblings, he's talking about a lot of things that will come in the 20th century, like Master Mode, a Nimrod, a man going to the moon, other worlds beyond this one. But it's not as if he can see the future. It's more like he's building assumptions on top of assumptions, and those assumptions are spot on. But then it's here where he goes to draw this diamond on the chalkboard, when he then starts to talk about the Essex men, and going on to say that the beast in him will be tamed, and he will go on to see the 20th century, and the next, and the next, and the next. And with seeing this, Mystique asks, why are you telling us this? To where then it's here for the first time. Sinister tells them, one day there will be a war between people like us and people who are not people. We must be on the same side. But then Destiny just knocked him out and they took him over to Bedlam, the psychiatric hospital, just to be clear. But for Destiny and Mystique, with them leaving Nathaniel Essex here to either get better or eventually die from his condition, that night when they left, Essex kept mumbling about being immortal, living forever, for all times, to where then he goes on to say red and black, continuously, 4 times at least, to where that's followed by him saying you're a ghost, repeatedly. But the next morning when Mystique and Destiny come back, they find that Nathaniel Essex had mysteriously died overnight. And with seeing this, Mystique asks the guard if he'll take some money to just say that Essex had walked out safely, and because the guy was about to take it, Mystique kills him because a man who takes a bribe is by definition not trustworthy. But then it's here where we begin to see what Mystique was talking about earlier, because 48 years later, Sinister came back and Mystique was puzzled to figure out how. Because in this moment, for Mystique, she had thought initially that this was case closed. Nathaniel Essex is dead and on to the next case. But at the time for Irene, for Destiny, she said that was something that remains to be seen. Because even at this time, Destiny knew that Sinister would be needed to reach the paradise on the horizon, the place that she would tell Mystique to burn down if she was kept from Mystique. And it's here where we see, after the death of Nathaniel Essex, that Destiny goes back to his home, where she discovers, behind the door that was chained up before, 4 empty cloning containers, each with a different suit marked above with a spade, heart, club, and a diamond, which now lets us know that there have been 4 Sinisters out in the wild since 1895, with the Diamond Sinister being the main one who most had believed to be the original Nathaniel Essex since 1985, and the second one that was revealed being Dr. Stasis, who has the club symbol. But aside from that, for the heart and the spade, those we'll get to soon, because as the story continues, they won't be a mystery for much longer. Alright, so for this one, we jump back in just after the events of Judgment Day, at a point where things have more or less gone back to normal, and the different members of the Quiet Council are reporting the recent updates and putting together the plans of how they're going to move forward with the new information, as well as the announcement of mutants sharing resurrection with the world. So it's here where you have Storm informing the council on the status of Arakko, as well as the Eternals giving the mutants Uranos for 1 hour at the moment of which they choose. And mind you, during this time, the death of Magneto is still pretty fresh, and for that reason, Charles he's a bit out of it. But as they go on to discuss the topic of sharing resurrection with the humans, it gets to the point to where Kate Pryde steers the topic, with her being in favor of the previous conditions of using it for sick children. But for Exodus, he's against the mutants sharing resurrections with humans on any level, because again, he believes it's a very for us, by us, Krakoa ENT, we all we got kind of thing. And for him, because of his religious belief for mutant kind and Hope being the Messiah, he sees sharing resurrection as sacrilegious. But even with Exodus voting against it, Hope tells him like, come on man, didn't you say something about JC sharing his miracles among the lowly? Which really is Hope using his own words against him, but also it lightens the mood in the room, with everyone cracking a chuckle, except for Destiny and Mystique. Because they're Destiny and Mystique. But then it's at this point when a certain somebody makes their way to the meeting a bit late, and that somebody is none other than Mr. Sinister. And we'll talk about why he's late in just a few. But with Sinister strolling in late, casually, Emma pokes a little jab saying like, you know, glad you can join us, and she goes on to say like, okay, yeah, now we can figure out this whole Dr. Stasis thing. But with Sinister making his way around the different seats, he responds to Emma like, you know, well, never mind, I saved the world during Judgment Day, and oh yeah, Dr. Stasis, yeah, we'll get to that. But as Sinister continues to make his way around, passing one seat after the other, it's here where Destiny addresses Exodus, to where then Exodus is like, yes? And Destiny then says ever so casually to Exodus, Nathaniel is about to kill Hope. And when she says this, there's a lot of confused faces around the room, including Sinister, because he's just like, what? Ah, you spoiled sport. And right away, Exodus just juices the guy. And with seeing this, as you might assume, just about everybody on the council is like, what is going on? Because sure, they had their questions and their suspicions about the whole Dr. Stasis thing, but with seeing this now, there's a suspicion that Sinister's up to something. But just seconds from now, the council being aware of this won't even matter. But before we continue forward, we first gotta jump back to earlier that day, before the council meeting, when Destiny went to have a word with Sinister. Because earlier before that meeting, Destiny approached Sinister, much like what we'd seen in issue 4, with her intentionally making conversation with Sinister to plant a thought in his head to keep him from resetting the timeline. Because earlier before the meeting, when she came to talk to Sinister, they had a bit of small talk about Judgment Day. He asked her if she got judged, and Destiny was like, yeah, I failed. And when she asked Sinister, how about you? In response, Sinister was like, I didn't fail. I didn't pass. It didn't judge me. But just after that, Destiny tells Sinister, you're a monster, Nathaniel. Don't worry, I'll always be here to judge you. Don't give up. To where then she just walks off saying, I wonder if Dr. Stasis got judged. Who knows? And for Destiny, that was it. She met with Sinister to tell him not to give up and to stir up the curiosity about Dr. Stasis. And with her doing this, it works. Because again, for Sinister, you give him a little push and he's going to overthink the rest. But with Destiny's words being just enough to keep Sinister from killing Moira, number 5, which would send everything back to before Magneto left the Quiet Council. This causes Sinister to reconsider before he hits the reset, and then to take it a step further, he then thinks about Judgment Day and how he doesn't want to go through that again. And God knows I don't either. But with thinking about this and overthinking, it then causes Sinister to come up with a quite genius plan. Because from here, he then creates a new save point with Moira number 6. He speeds up her aging so her mutant gene activates, and it's here where Sinister decides that he's gonna save Scum. And now, if anything goes wrong, he'll reset and come right back to this morning. And with how he has this set up, if he flatlines for more than 5 seconds, then the save Scum Moira will be terminated. And with how this is set up, he pretty much has 10 tries, 10 opportunities to get this right until he's out of Moira Scums. And from here, as he makes his way to the Quiet Council meeting, late, we already saw how that played out. Exodus killed him, and now he's on the save Scum Moira number 6 for the second time, which he intended to start off with a bang. But Destiny then gave the council the heads up, and even though Nightcrawler wanted to bring in Sinister for questioning, Exodus didn't, so he killed Sinister just like the first time. And then after this, when Sinister then uses his Moira game save number 3, Mystique then gets the jump on him because Destiny gave her the heads up. But then with Mystique holding Sinister, Hope uses Exodus's power to amplify her own and force her way into Sinister's mind to figure out what he's doing. But with Hope forcing her way in, she triggers Sinister's failsafe, which causes his head to explode so that the Quiet Council is none the wiser. But then from here, heading into save Scum number 4, Sinister's like, okay, I gotta think twice reroute that. Because for Destiny, if he doesn't go for her, she gives somebody the heads up. If he avoids her entirely, she gives everybody the heads up. But the thing is, when he does go for someone besides Destiny, sure, she'll give them the heads up, but it's gonna be late. But from here, Sinister then makes his way to go to the meeting. And as he does, he then says, referring to Destiny, we must be on the same side. But when this is all over, he will come for her. To where then he walks through the gate to Scum yet once again. And this time, with us being on the 4th attempt, Sinister makes his way in with a huge gun and rather heavy body armor that kind of reminds me of Live, Die, Repeat. But as soon as he walks into the meeting, he kills Exodus first, but then right away, Hope takes Storm's powers and she fries him. So then on number 5, Sinister comes back and right away he kills Exodus and Hope, only for Storm to then use her own powers and fry him. To where then on number 6, Sinister walks in with an even larger suit, but then he short circuits before he even makes it down the stairs, with his last words being something about cursing celestial tech. To where then for save file number 7, Sinister camps up top and he starts raining shots with some high-tech sniper rifle, until eventually Exodus sees where he's camping at and he races towards Sinister. But before he can get to him, Sinister deletes himself with his last words being, oh, for flip's sake. And then after this, for number 8, Sinister reverses the failsafe in his mind to make Xavier's head explode, and immediately after, Emma goes into her diamond form and she pushes her fingers through Sinister's eyes, which is kind of one of my favorites here. And then for number 9, Sinister goes with the multiple tentacle route with multiple eyes on each tentacle, shooting optic blasts, which in a frenzy kills a few members of the council. But Destiny's able to get away with Mystique, Kate was able to phase out of there, and Exodus teleported himself and Hope away. And now at this point, with Sinister having used 9 out of his 10 attempts, he has to make this last one count, because if it doesn't, then he has to go through Judgment Day all over again. And for the record, I feel like that's some real good motivation. Like, this has to work or else we're back at Judgment Day. But while Sinister's here trying to figure out what's the final plan, he also has the head of Dark Beast yelling and telling him to let him out or else he'll kill him. But Sinister just shuts him up, and I like how he does it, because he tells him that you're not the darkest beast anymore. Because nowadays, regular old Hank, he's got that covered all by himself. Which now has me thinking that we need to catch up with the X-Force and Wolverine playlist, because Beast has been wildin'. But then from here, Sinister finally figures out how he's gonna go about it for his final attempt. And he does this by heading to the Quiet Council meeting and telling everyone that he's ready to clear his name with the whole Dr. Stasis ordeal, in the same way that Stasis was revealed, with every telepath verifying a memory from Cyclops. So Sinister does the same thing here, and he tells all the telepaths to verify this memory. But as soon as they do, they're hit with a psychic bomb that is made from a cluster of cloned Xavier brains, which froze all the telepaths. And in addition, it's followed with a telekinetic pulse, which took out Emma and Xavier, leaving Hope and Exodus, who are pretty much just frozen. And to keep the other members of the council occupied while he takes out Hope and Exodus, he has these Cyclops eyes with angel wings on them, and some of them without, but most of them got wings. But these things are just shooting optic blasts everywhere, covering Sinister while he kills Exodus by dropping a mixture of Ambassador Harry Leland, who has the mutant power to increase mass, mixed with the power of Gambit, who has the power to turn mass into energy, which put together it wrecks Exodus. And now with Exodus out the way, Hope can no longer use his power, so Sinister then hits her with hollow points embedded with the genes of Unis the Untouchable, which then expand these psionic fields from inside her, which just tear her apart. It's overkill. But for Sinister, with him getting this dub by scumming, but nonetheless, he gets the win. He then takes a second to gloat, with him more or less saying that Dr. Stasis could never, to where then he just bamfs out of there. But even with Sinister leaving, like he'd said before, this dance isn't over. And sure, he would have liked to have cleaned up a bit more, but for the members that he was able to take out, this at least gives him something he can work with. But at this point, with Sinister gone and on his way to bring out Moira number 7, with his save scum for number 6 finally being a success, it's here where what's left of the Quiet Council make arrangements to resurrect their dead and go after Sinister. Alright, so for this one, we come back just after Sinister's timeline save scum, which took us through 9 versions of Sinister trying to kill off the Quiet Council, and eventually on his 10th, he had managed to take out what he expressed to be as many as he needed. And like we'd seen afterwards, he'd bamfed out of there and made his way back to his secret lab. But throughout the entirety of Immortal X-Men, all the way to this point, we were never told why Sinister was doing this. And here in issue 10, which is the conclusion of the first story arc of Immortal X-Men, heading into Sins of Sinister, originally here we're not given the full explanation. It's rather just teased and ended with a cliffhanger, which then takes us over into Sins of Sinister issue 1. But instead of us doing the whole cliffhanger song and dance, for this one we're gonna make it a bit more conclusive. So first we're gonna talk about what's happening, and then I'm gonna get into a more clearer explanation than what we've been shown in Immortal X-Men, so that when we begin Sins of Sinister this week, there won't be any residual confusion. But from here we pick up with Sinister, who's made his way back to his secret lab just after his Save Scum massacre. And when he gets here, he requests for his machine to bring forth Moira number 7 so that he can now create a new save point so that he doesn't lose the progress that he's gained, of which, like he'd mentioned before, he's satisfied with to this point. But also with doing this, Sinister wants to make sure that if things go left in the near future and he needs to save Scum again, that he'll come back to this moment instead of going all the way back to where he'd have to attack the Quiet Council again, or even, God forbid, go back before Judgment Day. So with Sinister coming here, he brings forth Moira number 7, he makes a new backup, and it works rather seamlessly, but then he leaves from here in quite the hurry, because now he needs to play out the other part of his plan. But as we continue, we're then given narration that's coming from Charles Xavier, and with how this is done, it's really like this monologue that Charles is giving over a sequence of events that we see taking place over the course of this conclusion. But as we see Sage, Beast, Domino, and Cable sorting through the aftermath of this slaughter, it's here where Cable takes Hope's body and he gives a speech to the people of Krakoa, which for us is inaudible, because once again, it's more like a montage visually taking place. We instead hear from Xavier. And in Xavier's monologue, he's saying things like, "Are you suspicious of me? I hope so. After all, I have done much to be suspicious of. It is one of my ways of protecting everyone. People should be suspicious of me. Let me explain." And then he goes on to talk about how he's an idealist, but experience has taught him to be practical. And even though you have the Xavier's dream, he knows what the world thinks about mutants, and he knows what the world thinks about him. But regardless of the Xavier's dream of mutants and mankind coexisting peacefully, Charles goes on to say that he knows that that's just a dream, and he didn't create the X-Men to necessarily fulfill that dream, but instead for them to fight for a world where that dream or any dream could come true. But also at this point, when we go back to the real-time events, with Charles, Exodus, Hope, and Emma gone, it comes down to the point in Arbor Magna where somebody needs to step in for Hope and complete the resurrection process so that they can come back. But when it boils down to it, no one's really leaping at the opportunity to fill Hope's shoes. And for example, we see Mimic, who gets overwhelmed and takes off, saying he can't do it. And soon after we find that Sync ends up doing it. And even for him, he's not 100% sure himself, but it's really one of those cases where if not him, then who else? Because without Hope, the five are incomplete, and someone needs to sync them together. But also, as a reminder, we're shown the top secret resurrection redundancy protocol, where the genetic base is originally provided by Sinister, which is a significant detail that we'll get back to. But then next you have the members of the five who grow a new body for that individual, and then finally the mind is restored from that individual's backup, of which there are multiple, which is a redundancy that's been there from the beginning. But also with how the resurrection process is set up at the moment, Sync and Mimic are on the front lines to replace any member of the five who may have died or gone missing. And had it been Egg, Proteus, Elixir, or Tempest, the stand-in process would have been more simple. But with Hope being a more unique deviation and the member of the five who synergizes the process, her involvement has been so critical because at times in the past when they tried it without her, it didn't work. And with them focusing on bringing back Hope first, this is where the nervousness is coming from, because if they can't bring Hope back, then resurrection is done. It's over, which once again really leans into the idea of her being the mutant messiah, because aside from her being the first mutant born after M-Day, she's now also the most important member of the five because she's the hardest to replace. But fortunately, this method of resurrecting her, it works. And when it's announced that Hope's alive, all of Krakoa rejoices, and shortly after she's back, they fill her in on what happened. And soon after, she helps to bring back Charles, Exodus, and Emma, because they put her back to work right away. But shortly after this, we then see the X-Men going after Sinister, with Destiny letting them know that he retreated back to his old underground lair in Alaska, which for the most part at this time is completely wrecked because of the events with the Phoenix Five. But again, Sinister didn't come here in an attempt to truly escape, but as it stands for the moment, he needs to make it look that way. So with all the X-Men coming after him, he makes it seem like he's putting up a resistance. He throws out all kinds of abominations to fight them off, but at no point did he truly want or have the desire to actually get away. But nonetheless, he puts on the performance and he puts on the show because he needs everyone, with the exception of a few, to believe that he was stopped and believe that he had actually been apprehended. Because with doing this, it would make it seem like it's all over. Because for Sinister, he needed to kill multiple members of the Quiet Council, and we'll talk about why in just a little bit. But with Sinister needing multiple members of the Quiet Council dead, he knew that regardless of whatever way that he would have chosen to do it, the trail would have led back to him. But on top of that, with the multiple tries that he'd went through, we also know that it kind of had to be something extravagant to actually work. And with him killing them off in a very conspicuous way, he couldn't just turn himself in. He had to make it look like he ran. He had to make it look like he resisted. He had to sell the idea that things were not going exactly the way that he'd planned. Because finally, with Sinister knowing that he would go before the council, they would send him to the pit, and most of everyone would believe that this situation was taken care of and handled. But now, with Sinister being sentenced, it's here where the true revelations begin to unfold. Because shortly after Sinister goes down into the pit, Destiny tells Mystique that they have to get out of here. And in this moment, we don't see Destiny explain it to Mystique, but instead the two of them just get out of there quick, fast, and in a hurry. And after that, we then go back to Charles, who we see remove Cerebro from his head, only for us then to find that he has the Sinister diamond on his forehead. And so now originally this is how Immortal X-Men concludes. There's this cliffhanger that just sends us off into Sins of Sinister. But instead, I want to take a few minutes to explain what this ending actually means, pertaining to Immortal X-Men issues 1 through 10. Because for Sinister, with him cloning different Moiras, so that if something went wrong, he could just restart the timeline, make adjustments, and move forward, this was his contingency for the larger plan, with multiple Moiras sustaining a number of timeline resets, so that if needed, or when needed, Sinister could kill one of them off and he could start over. But the most significant moment that shows us the plot heading forward into Sins of Sinister is when he successfully killed the members of the Quiet Council, with that being Hope, Charles, Emma, and Exodus. Because with the Resurrection Redundancy Protocol truly starting with Sinister, who provides the genetic base for every resurrection, this means from the beginning the Resurrection Protocol has been at his mercy. But because he couldn't attempt to do this one at a time without being made or getting caught, he needed to make sure that this was done, starting from the head, starting from the Quiet Council, and if not all of the members, then he needed to make sure that the significant ones were covered so that when they came back, they would have Sinister's DNA embedded within their own. And with Sinister putting on the front of trying to get away and trying to show resistance, Charles, Emma, Hope, and Exodus were already compromised. And from their recent resurrection going forward, they had just been playing along with Sinister's front and voting to send him to the pit so that in the meantime, others could be killed and converted through resurrection until enough people are infused with Sinister and then they can set him free. So yeah, it's very much a Sinister secret invasion that we're heading into here, because aside from what we've talked about in this video, there's a number of other things that are going to carry over, but for the conclusion of Immortal X-Men, I just wanted to make sure that we'd laid the foundation before we hopped into Sins of Sinister, because the way I see this, it's almost as if Kieron Gillen has taken the liberty of fleshing out a lot of Jonathan Hickman's footnotes during Powers of 10 when we were told about the Sinister line or the Sinister timeline where he would betray Krakoa, or at least giving us a close version of that. And as we continue through Sins of Sinister, I may do a bit of going back and forth between that and Powers of 10 just to see how close they line up, cause I mean, why not? And I think it was like 3 years ago, maybe more, where I did a video about Sinister's betrayal based on the little pieces that Hickman gave us at the time, and I haven't watched it since. I'm just gonna link it down below just to see how well it aged, because most of what we're getting into feels very familiar. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.